Hi everyone, welcome to Ishan Khosla Tutoring Services. I hope you all are doing well. I know we're right bang in the middle of the application season and you will be awfully busy with your personal statements, your essays and your test prep. I wish you all the best. So before we begin today, I'm very happy to announce that my website is now live. Please go check it out and let me know what you think of it, what you make of it. Again, here's a reminder that there are a couple of slots left on my tutoring services that I will be offering to a couple of students. So please fill the form down in the link below as soon as you possibly can if you'd like to work with me. I help with all things personal statement, essays, SOP, and the LNAT. And this could be to undergrad and postgrad program.
With me, without me, with me, without me.
And today we're going to speak about my Oxford interview. It's a bit strange to say it. I leave for UCL in about less than 10 days now. And it's just sinking in. So it's an exciting time. But I can't wait to get started on this video. So let's jump right into it. So to give you a little bit of background on the Oxford interview, usually this interview is conducted in person. For me and for students in 2021 and 2020, it was conducted online. These interviews vary by college. The number of interviews, it's usually not more than 2 or 3. Some colleges prefer to have a 1 hour long interview. Some colleges like mine at Wadham wanted to have 2 interviews in 20-minute interviews separated by a couple of hours. And it completely depends on the college, how they want to structure their interviews and with who they want to structure the interviews. Usually the thumb rule at Oxford is that you don't have an interview with less than 2 people. Sometimes there's a panel as well. Completely depends on the college. And the interview is the same for everybody. So it's the same questions, same kind of assessments that they put you through. And at no level is it personal. In the sense that they're not going to ask you anything about your personal statement, very rarely. If anything, just as a icebreaker of sorts to start a conversation. But nothing really about your grades or anything personal. It's really to test your knowledge of the law and test your knowledge of what you would be like at Oxford. The reason they do this is because this is a good way to find out for them if you would fit well in their tutoring system. So now Oxford prides itself on their tutorials, which is about 6 to 7 people that they have in class with the professor interacting one-on-one. And essentially the professors that are going to teach you want to figure out if you're a good fit for their class. And so they will pose questions, they will pose different kind of analogies, and we'll just get into that in the next couple of sections. But this is how the interview really looks like. And they could be interviewing a whole bunch of people for the seats that are allotted. And sometimes what happens is that they also have pooling systems. So say that if you had an interview and they realize that, okay, you were good, but we've had great applicants already, they can actually pool you to a different college with larger number of seats. I mean, larger number of seats is an understatement because the largest number of seats is like 10 for about 2,000 applicants. So they could do that. It's not something you can understand or decide beforehand and apply to such colleges. It really is up to the college and whether they feel you're worthy enough or not. And the process usually takes an entire day. So they usually will give you, for example, with Wadham, I had 2 interviews, which was spanned between 6 or 7 hours. And essentially that's usually how it works. They give you a day in the email and you can confirm that with them and you tell them which time slots work for you, but they usually give you what their preferences are. Now basically for prep, I actually started preparing for the interview in November, early November actually. I got the email for the interview in early December, and the reason for that was that I didn't want to take the chance that if I did make it, I wasn't prepared. And therefore I did start early, like I just said. And the way I worked on, I was very fortunate to interact with a lot of students at Oxford and convince some of them to help me take these interviews, mock interviews of sorts. Those really helped me. I worked through case files. I worked across what kind of questions I could expect. I worked with them for at least an hour and a half each, 5 or 6 of them. And basically we went over what their interview process was like, what the questions could be like, grueling questions, questions of the law, analogies, etc., which kind of sum up what the process looks like. And what they did is that they made me sit through the process as there was an interview, and they kept the stakes the same, they kept the level of intimidation the same, and that really helped me build my confidence on interview day, because when I was entering the interview room, rather say the Zoom room, I wasn't nervous. This is something that I'd done before. I'd expected this before, and I kind of knew what I'd signed up for, and I knew what was about to come. So that helped me a lot in terms of having people who I spoke to about the interview, looked at YouTube videos on Cambridge as well about these interviews. So do have a look at these videos. I'll put them in the link below. They really did help me with my interview. And in the next section, I'll speak about my experience and what you can take out of it. Great. So as I mentioned, my interview was spanned across the day, and I think, and I'm going to tell you obviously in Indian Standard Time. For me, it was one interview was at 4 p.m. and the other was at 9:30 p.m. And basically, I think I was one of the last people that they were interviewing for the day. I think the interviews do go on for about 3 or 4 days. I was, like I said, I was very nervous because I'd heard of all these things about Oxford and the Oxford interview. And I was nervous going in. I was dressed with a blazer. I didn't want to be underdressed at any point, even though people had said that smart casual is usually the way you could go. But you could never go wrong with a blazer and a shirt. You don't want to be underdressed for this. So my first interview, which took place at 4 p.m. and lasted about 20-25 minutes, was with 2 PhD fellows. Before I begin telling you about this interview, actually, let me give you a little bit of a disclaimer. I cannot disclose any of the content or information of the interview itself. I have signed some sort of non-disclosure agreement with the University of Oxford when I accepted the interview invite, and I cannot violate that. The idea is because the questions usually remain the same for the cycle, and I don't want there to be any kind of problem for your application or my stay in the United Kingdom with my agreement with the University of Oxford. So I will give you a gist of what I'm talking about, and you'll have a good idea, but I will not be able to really reveal specifics, and I apologize for that. So my first interview, as I said, was with 2 PhD fellows, and they both were very, very warm, welcoming, and inviting. And I think they could really smell that I was nervous, and I was trying really hard not to look nervous. But I think when you don't try to look nervous is when you really crack, right? And I think that was a little bit of that was happening to me, but I was really happy throughout the entire interview. And so typically the way they work, and is probably almost how all Oxford law interviews look like, is that they will give you a case, and this could be any case or any law, actually, rather than a case, any kind of law, and they will ask you to read the law once, and then they will give you different analogies to keep understanding the way you test it. Right, so they will give you, suppose, some sense of land law, and then they will ask you questions on, if this is my neighbor, can I plant trees on his backyard? Can I sell lemonade on his backyard? Can I open a business on my own backyard? How does that affect my neighbor? And I'm of course simplifying it, but there are very specific pointers that need to be followed, and they keep testing whether you're able to stay in those guidelines. And they do nudge you a little bit in the right direction if they feel like you are being lost. And I think at one point I was. Pro tip: if any of your interviews are online, do not just take the prompts on the chat, because the chat box little. The UI wasn't that great, and it was kind of blurry. It wasn't really sitting well on my screen. So if you want, you can copy it onto a Word document or something of the sort to help you read better. But basically, the interview was fairly straightforward. They kept giving me analogy after analogy to apply the same kind of law, and then they changed the law a little bit. They changed aspects just to see how fluid I would be with my understanding of the law. And then they will ask me to explain the law to them in the most simplest way possible. So it's fairly straightforward. I felt very good after that interview. If anything, I went and actually spoke to. They asked me, any questions that you have for me. I said the only thing I want to say is I had fun. I really had fun, and I think that was very genuine of me, because I wanted to show them my true self, and that was my philosophy throughout the interview process and the application, that I really want to show them my true self. And my true self was really happy with that interview and the way that was going. Then came the waiting period, which is grueling, and I think it's purposely done, if anything. It was a couple of hours, and I got into another shirt because I completely sweat out the last one, and I wanted to look fresh for the next. And I didn't want them to know that it's like nighttime here, and that I was looking drowsy or anything of the sort. So I changed my shirt, got fresh, and I walked into my second interview. Now, my second interview was by a very senior professor at Wadham, who was also a private solicitor and another professor from, I think, another college. I think it was Merton, I'm not too sure, who was there just taking notes about the interview. And this interview was difficult. I think it was very intimidating. And I know a lot of people would say that the Oxford interviews are set out to be intimidating and scary, but I really want to tell you about my experience. And I did feel quite intimidated and scared in that moment, because I think it became very clear to me that the interviewer wanted to wrap up this interview as quickly as possible, and that's also a tactic. And it became a little bit evident to me that this is kind of good cop, bad cop. The good cop were the PhD fellows before, this is the bad cop that I need to face. And as soon as we began, I think she just asked me a question about my personal statement, just as an icebreaker. And then she started giving me scenarios one by one. And when I say one by one, it was almost like a rapid fire, right? It was just at the click of her fingers that scenarios were popping up. And it became a little nerve-wracking for me. I started getting a little stressed, a little anxious, and she could see it. But I kept answering, at some points even without thinking, because I felt like I didn't want her to notice that I was breaking. I didn't want her to notice that I was nervous. Which actually, in fact, I think was a mistake I made, because when I speak to a lot of people, they say, it's usually the people who've coming crying out of the interview rooms are the ones that really impress them. But I just didn't want to seem that I'll break, right? I knew that I had an answer and that I would defend it. So I kept going, and she gave me different scenarios, and this had nothing to do with the law, right? So she would give me scenarios of, if someone is drowning, what is the law? And then, why don't you create a law? And I think that was difficult, because that's never something that anyone's asked me. Why don't you create a law? And I tried to create a law, and I couldn't really think on top of my head, because it was already in the second interview and I was already quite exhausted. And then she asked me, what do you think of a certain kind of law? What do you think the merits of this are? What do you think the goal of our legal system is? And it became a little, I think at one point I said, I don't know, right? Because I was trying to be as honest as possible. And she did tell me, she sat me down and told me what that particular module meant. And I think I ended that interview on a good note. I think I felt good about it, because I think in my head I was confident that I didn't break, because they were really trying to break me, right? And I spoke to some of my peers who had also been at the same interview from Wadham, and they were absolutely distraught with the second interview. Some of them said, I completely just blanked, and there was just silence for long periods of time. And I can definitely see that, right? Because that's the way that the interviews are structured, and the way that they ease you in the first one, where you're a little bit confident, have some sense of what you're getting yourself into, and in the second one it becomes a little more extreme, a little more rigorous, and a little more to your face. And I definitely felt a lot of that in my second interview. So what are some tips that I can give you that would help you in your interview? I think first off, because I was a senior student, I was already at a disadvantage, right? Because I didn't apply for the senior status program, and the reason for that being that the Indian bar doesn't recognize 2 years of law, they require 3. And so some colleges actually turned around and told me while I was applying, and I wrote them emails that why aren't you applying for the senior status program? And we don't think it's wise you're applying for the regular one. So I was already at a back foot with my application and interview. And the tips I can give you for your interview are, definitely put yourself through a lot of logical reasoning questions. Look at some cases, look at some modules, look at what, pick up some cases from the UK website, pick up some laws from the UK website and start reading them. Get used to reading cases. One of the interviewers who I worked with, the mock interviewers, sent me about 50-60 pages of reading before my interview. And that's commonplace for a lot of colleges. They give you reading material beforehand, which could be as long as 30 pages. Some could be as long as a page. Some colleges do that. So that's something you should be always prepared for. Prepare yourself to be able to be clear in your answers, to be able to answer as directly as possible. And like I said, keep looking at laws, because there will definitely be a question on the laws itself. So how you interpret them, how you use them. Maybe pick up any kind of critical thinking or logical reasoning book, solve such problems, and try and figure out your way out of them. I know there's some really wacky questions out there. I think one of my interviewers told me about a question that they were asked where the interviewer asked them, how can you tell me you're at Oxford? And that really like tripped me up, right? How do you explain to somebody that you're at Oxford without mentioning that, oh, I am at Oxford? Then there was, of course, how would you take over the world with a banana? So that's not something that really did come my way, but of course some analogies did, especially in the second interview. So you should prepare yourself for that, most definitely. Prepare yourself for difficult questions, strange questions that come your way. And it is going to be a taxing process for sure. I will not sugarcoat this. This is based on my own process, my own interview. It is taxing, it is difficult, but it is a step that you need to take to be able to make sure that you are at one of the best schools for law in the world. And I really don't think that their intention at Oxford during their interviews especially is to trip you up, is to trap you. It's really to keep throwing you a line. And sometimes tutors do that, so do look out for that. Don't hold on to your opinion too strongly if like it's completely been hollowed out. Please do take a moment to go about and say, after consideration, what you've said is right, because that shows you're actually a lot more stronger in accepting and understanding other people's opinions rather than just speaking your mind and being stubborn about it. So do not be afraid of that, but do hold your ground strongly, because they will throw a lot of things at you and you will have to defend yourself. And they will hold you for everything you say. So you really need to be a little more careful about what you're about to say. You can also, a tip that one of my friends gave me was you should always flag post. So in a certain sense, always say, okay, I think this argument could be solved in the following two ways. So now the interviewer knows he or she is going to expect two things coming out. Otherwise, I can say, this argument can be answered by the following. I can keep going on and on and on speaking, and there's no structure to that. So being able to speak structurally is a little difficult, but it's something you need to pick up and you need to start learning. Speak to yourself in the mirror, speak to your friends, family through these things. Look at debates, right? Look at debates which are happening across the globe, which is maybe Roe versus Wade, anything that can be picked up in law and asked you. Of course, they don't expect you to know everything. They don't expect you to have outside knowledge of British common law. But it's always good practice knowing that. So for example, if it does come up, you're pretty secure. Don't brag about your knowledge. And this was something that was drilled into me fairly early on by some of my friends at Oxford who helped me prepare for the interview. Don't do that. Because the minute you believe that I'm going to show these interviewers something, say in the field of jurisprudence, or say in the field of common law, and pick up and cite some case just to impress them, they will throw you off the boat. They will come at you because this is probably their expertise. So what they will try and do is they will try and understand how you know this and what you know, and they will keep grilling you. So don't give them that room to do that. So please just stay as neutral as, in a certain sense, just answer the questions that you've been asked. You don't want to open a line of criticism for yourself during the interview or a moment of embarrassment. And this is like really honest advice that I got that I want to share with you. And don't be afraid to ask questions, because there will be points where you will be pressed into a corner, but don't think that the tutor there is not going to throw you a lifeline. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask, okay, can you explain to me what this means? Can you explain to me what that means? If they give you a piece of law and you can't understand a certain word, feel free to ask. So I did. I actually asked them in my first interview and they said, we're sorry, we can't tell you because that word is kind of what we want you to interpret. And that might happen. That's all right. So I kind of tried to figure out what it might mean through that word. So sometimes that can happen, but don't be too afraid to ask them that odd question because it shows you're interacting with them. Also in the last section where they ask you, do you have any questions for us? Feel free to ask them questions if you really do have questions. Don't force yourself to say anything, because they interview a lot of people and they interview throughout the end of the academic cycle. So if you've made it to the interview round, you're already in a very good place, and know that a lot of people who applied haven't. I think think the interview acceptance rate is 35%. 1 out of every 3, that's huge. Or 3 out of 10. But I just want you to know that there is some pressure, there is some sense of intimidation that they use. But that's primarily to figure out where you would crack and how you would crack. But it's completely okay to crack, and please do that, because it shows them that you truly want to learn, right? Unless you're stubborn like me who keeps going at it and not letting myself crack. So that's what my Oxford interview tips would be for you. So that was my Oxford interview prep. That was my Oxford interview experience. You can usually use this for most Oxford interviews. This is not exactly law specific, of course, even though my experience is law specific. This is kind of a template that you could use for most interviews. I might leave a link below to a form that if you would like some of the questions that I prepared with, I would be happy to get them to you. I can also help you prepare for your personal statement, SOP, essay, and your LNAT if that's something you're still struggling with. Again, a reminder that I have very few slots remaining. You can sign up in the link below. And I will be heading to UCL in the next 10 days. So I don't know if this is the last video in this setup with this equipment. But I will definitely take you guys along, and I want to show you my journey there. I want to show you what first year law looks like, especially for a senior student, a senior international student at that. Thank you so much for watching. Please do feel free to leave any comments or questions or concerns that you have. I'd be happy to address them. Also, please don't forget to check out my website. It's live now, finally, after a lot of work that's gone in. Do have a look. Do let me know what you think. And I look forward to seeing you guys very soon. Best of luck for your applications. There's still a lot of time for the interview, and I know you guys are going to do well. Just let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Feel free to leave them in the comments below. Again, a reminder, I have limited seats available for if you want to work with me. You can sign up right below. Thank you so much. Please do like, share, and subscribe so I can get to a lot more students just like you. And I will see you on the other side. Thank you.